So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're doing something of an initial impressions video of a war game that we played recently.
At Basement Con.
Yes. And the game's called Crown of Roses. And it's by GMT Games. And it came out in like 2009. So it's an older title. I don't have it with us to show.
Yeah.
Because it was owned by the host of Basement Con.
And we didn't get to shoot a video because we just didn't get a chance.
Well, it wasn't frankly,
time.
it was impromptu.
Yeah, right.
But very briefly, Crown of Roses, as you may guess from the title, is a game covering the English Civil War. Mm-hmm. No, that's not true. It's the Wars of the Roses.
Right, not English Civil War. Wars of the Roses. Yeah.
I've got other games on my mind.
Yeah,
so it's a Wars of the Roses game. So it's the Yorkists against the Lancastrians, generally speaking. What I did think was interesting is that you can play it up to 4 players.
Yep.
So I think you can have you can have Warwick and the one that I was, which I should remember, but I don't.
I was York. That's all I know.
Yes, I forget. So
yeah,
but think Richard III, that kind of era. So the game is an up to 4 player block war game, and so if you imagine something like Triumph and Tragedy, which is 3-player block war game, you kind of facing your blocks towards you, and they're facing this, and they're doing this. It's kind of in that vein, but the game is quite a complicated exploration of the Wars of the Roses. So, because you have, a more traditional kind of block war game where you've got areas that are connected by borders and you're moving across those and you're chucking dice for combat based on the strength of your blocks.
Yeah.
But more than that is you're doing that to control territories, and those territories give you votes
in Parliament.
Which is, it's an abstraction of your political power. Mm-hmm. And then after you've kind of done all your campaigning, and you say, this is how many votes I've got, you then take everyone off the board, because all of the people on the board, it's like, they're your members of Parliament, your lords and stuff, and they're kind of representative armies, but you put them all out, and you are voting for titles and offices that they hold throughout the course of the campaign. You've been putting out some of your political influence to sway them, to join your side. So you might have this particular block through this campaign, but I'm doing my damnedest
to take it
away from you, so that next campaign he'll join me. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I'm doing some of this on the board, moving guys around, chucking dice, fighting. But more than that, I'm also trying to recruit guys to you. Mm-hmm. There's a number of ways to win that game. You can win by having like 3/4 of all of the people in Parliament on your side, which would be very difficult to do.
I can't even imagine how that would happen.
You'd have to have steamrolled enough where...
yeah, or people would have fallen asleep, I think.
Yeah,
almost.
like the game's like over anyway at that point.
Yeah.
Or, generally speaking, you win by being kind of elected king for a certain number of turns in the game, not necessarily consecutive.
Yeah.
And so there's a military victory as well, which is very difficult, I think.
Well, because the game, frankly, the game is not necessarily about military conquest. You're going to use that to your advantage to take key areas that you're going to gain more votes for.
Yes.
But you're not going to drive people off the continent or eradicate them.
And it's one of those things where if you can do one of those victory conditions, you can do them all. Yeah. Because if you can conquest that much, it's because you've got all the pieces, and you're electing yourself king every time anyway.
Yeah. You've won every way that you possibly can win.
Yeah. That would be it's kind of a perfect storm.
Yeah.
But it was a very interesting game.
Well, and it's a card. We haven't mentioned it. It's a card-driven game.
Yes, that's true.
You use cards, which they're the old-style CDG, kind of like Wilderness War, where they're pretty basic. They have ops or an event, typically. Yeah. And, you have a hand of those. You're using them. Some of them are like events or instants, and then some of them are, 4 op points, and you can move these guys, blah, blah, blah. But it's very interesting because you really have to focus on all three parts of the game, or at least have some stake in all three parts of them, because you can't get steamrolled. Like, for instance, I felt like I was trying to win too many nobles in the court and not focusing on getting my ancestral allied places to get more votes. Whereas Mike, who was the king and had, frankly, more votes than us to start,
Yes,
was kind of doing a lot of everything and doing it very well. I thought it was interesting that you really have to focus on everything, I think, to be in the game.
Yes. And so, you're trying to influence all these guys in Parliament, and then once you do all that, you kind of get everyone who's on your side, and then you've got all these influence points kind of going into the next turn. But before you do that, you, auction off, it's a blind bid, your points for these titles. So there's the title of, the Chancellor of England, or there's, the Lord of the Admiralty, or Warden of the North. There's a bunch of them, and all of those give you special abilities, and you get a little block for that office, which gives you some military strength.
That has a lot of military strength, frankly.
And so you then get into, I want to spend to get those cool titles to give me an advantage, but that's the same currency that I'm using to influence blocks
in Parliament
to get other, lords onto my side that way. And so there's lots of ways you're using your influence, and if you bankrupt yourself, or if you just bid poorly, because whatever you bid is gone.
Yep.
So if you bid a whole bunch and you don't get, because someone bids higher than you, they've spent all theirs, they've at least got a title. You get nothing.
And I think that's also what happened early in the game, where I was voting somewhere between 4 and 6 of my influence points, and it seemed like Mike was voting 5 to 7 every time. So he won all of them. I had a ton of votes, but I just couldn't win.
Yeah, it's how you have to go really hard or not hard at all, and then you're like, do I even bother at that point? Because then he's bankrupted himself buying all these titles, which gives him an advantage.
Yeah.
But then I've got all this political capital to just take all of his lords away for next turn.
Yeah.
And might have all these titles, but then I'll drain the rest of his court as the elites kind of stay together. A very, very interesting.
And I think that's what I mean. You really can't go all in on just one thing. You can't just have the titles.
It's very hard to do.
You can't just do the movement and the combat. You also can't just influence Parliament. If you do any of those, you're going to strand yourself to the point where, 1, you don't have any votes. 2, you're not winning anything. And 3, all of a sudden you'll find that your lords have gone to fight for other people and you're done. So you got to really keep a balanced approach to that game.
And it's kind of an old school game in the sense that everything is up for discussion. Everything can be bartered and bargained. So, the scenario we played was a 3-player one. It's called Kingmaker, because the king had a bunch of points, but us two combined
had more points. Yep.
But you didn't have enough on your own.
Nope.
Nor did I.
Yep.
And so someone would always align with someone else to be the Kingmaker.
Right.
And so you'd get that, but even in the blind bidding for your the offices, I can put some in for you.
Yeah, you can bid for other people.
Because you bid who you're bidding it for and the amount. So we can discuss. We're like, well, we can both put in a couple, and you get it.
Yep.
But later on, I want to do the other one. I'll get that one.
Right.
And us combined can take it from the person who's got the most and just kind of churn things up.
Yeah.
And so, you can even do that if you've got a lot of political capital. You can kind of hold some of these titles at ransom.
Yeah.
In a way where you're like, I'm just going to buy this for myself because I know I've got a bunch and you probably can't take that from me. But I'm happy to put in some votes for you, and you can have that if you don't attack me here, or you do this for me.
Yep.
All the table talking and bargaining, none of which is binding, but
right.
So you can get into some of that element of it as well, which is always enjoyable in the game.
I thought also it was very cool with those titles or offices, whatever they were called. They each give you a certain amount of votes or a certain amount of influence. It was interesting how I was kind of looking at those going, oh, that one's really important for my strategy. So it was very unique. I think the problem with the game Not sure the rules are great.
No, the rules show their age, right?
Yeah.
It's from 2009. Rule book writing has come a long way since then.
Right.
And it is a very complicated game. There is a lot of layers to it.
Yeah.
And so the rule book for a game like that has to be good. And it frankly isn't.
Well, and it also, I don't feel like it had many examples or graphics showing movement or combat or how it was working.
It basically had no play aids.
Yeah, it was very odd.
It didn't list the
in that regard.
actions that you can take on your play card. I'm thinking of something like Here I Stand. At least it has the names of the things that you can do and how much they cost. It didn't even have that.
Yeah.
So like it's old school. I'd love to see a new version of it where it got kind of...
Rule book worked over and some examples.
The new treatment.
Yeah.
Because it's a beautiful looking game.
Oh, it is absolutely gorgeous.
And the stuff you're doing is cool and interesting. But yeah, it's quite long as well, I think.
Well, I think we ended up playing 2 turns and it was like a 3-hour game. But we were learning.
Yeah.
And it was... after midnight or almost midnight, we were like, we just got to stop.
I think because of the table talks and the bidding and the auctions, you'd probably want to time those, but you could probably get it down to like an hour a turn, maybe slightly less, maybe, and at most it's a 9-turn game.
But I thought it was really interesting. I mean, I think I sat down with trepidation at first because I knew, this is going to be an old style rule book,
and the rule book is
challenging.
Big. It's old and it's big.
And I thought, nobody really knows the rules well, but I thought we learned it pretty quickly. We were able to actually execute it on the board. The next step would have been learning the strategies, learning actually how am I supposed to be doing what I'm doing. That game has a lot of potential, and I think as a first impression, it was a game that I was like, ooh, I would like to play that again.
That's one I would like to revisit and, see if someone's kind of tidied up the rules. Maybe there's some living rules somewhere. And maybe some good play aids for it to really kind of let it be a bit smoother of an experience as well. But the other part that I thought was interesting is it kind of led to a discussion with us where like there's this like generation of games from GMT that like we just don't know.
Yeah.
And basically the stuff from like the mid to the late 2000s.
Yeah.
Like...
Well, we really didn't get into GMT games until like 2014, 2015.
Yes.
So everything before that, I mean, aside from Twilight Struggle.
Yeah, or like Paths of Glory, right?
Yeah.
There's some like, evergreens, so to speak, that are out there. But there's like, I'd never even heard of Crown of Roses.
Either. Yeah.
I've heard of some of it, but there's a ton of stuff out there that's cool. So I have a couple, just offhand. I have Hellenis, which is from 2009 as well.
War, yeah.
And then I've got Clash of Monarchs as well. Like, I just have a couple of these kind of old school games. When's this one from? 2008. Okay. Right? Just like, I don't know.
Well, and it's
you don't
also...
hear people talking about them because they're just before the age of, like, YouTube on wargaming, basically.
Well, and it's also interesting. This is Craig Basink, who did Triumph and Tragedy and Conquest and Consequence.
Yes.
It's a block war game. So these were his earlier designs, and now he's kind of done his master strokes. I don't know who the designer here is.
Bob Kalinowski.
Okay.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, and that's a 7 Years War, right?
Yeah, like...
And it's a card-driven game.
There's...
you also played Unhappy King Charles a couple months ago.
What was that? Maybe 2011?
So it's kind of the same...
Yeah, there's this area. Like wealth of games that we have this kind of dearth of knowledge about.
Yeah.
And, we had an opportunity to play one of them, and it was really cool. If you can kind of get through it.
Yep.
I'd love to see some of these kind of get a facelift.
Yeah.
And, I really hope we do get to revisit Crown of Roses.
I did think it was interesting. We tweeted out a couple of pictures, and I think a couple people came back saying, oh, I really enjoyed that game. The rule book was terrible. It was a little bit fiddly. We struggled with it, so therefore I sold it.
Yes.
And I think I heard that a couple of different times.
Yeah.
And I think I would agree with that if that was my game.
It was good in spite of the rulebook.
Yes.
Or if you can get through the rulebook, there's an interesting game.
There's a good game there.
And, again, we just kind of dabbled with it for a few hours, but it was both interesting and something very different and new as well.
And it actually emboldened me to play a lot of additional games like that. Like you've got a couple here, and... I'm sure we can find some of those old 07, 08, 09, 2010 games that we could give a run and see how they are. So Interesting experience. I'm glad Mike made us play that.
Yeah, I'm really glad we did too.
And we started pretty late. If we'd have started, I think we started like at 8:30.
Yeah.
That's a game you want to start like at 5.
Yeah.
So you get it down. And
you start in the afternoon and you play in the afternoon and evening.
Right. But anyway, it was an interesting game. I enjoyed it. Crown of Roses. I thought it was very unique and interesting.
So yeah, if you've played Crown of Roses, please let us know in the comments. Yeah. Let us know what your experiences are, and if you know how you got through that, or if there's any like good advice out there as well, or if there's any other games kind of in that family or that era that we should check out. Let us know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was some thoughts about Crown of Roses from GMT. Appreciate you tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.